And I will not let my son grow up thinking that is what love looks like. I will not let him grow up thinking that love is quiet and the absence of want. I will not teach him that. I refuse to teach him that. And the only way to refuse was to leave. She picked Connor up. She held him against her chest. She breathed in the smell of him, that new baby smell, that impossible combination of milk and warmth and something else, something that is just the essence of a brand new person. She whispered in his ear. She didn't tell me what she whispered. She said she would take that to her grave, that the words she said to her son at 3 a.m. in a dark nursery in a house in New Canaan were hers and his and nobody else's, and they had not been spoken since, and they would not be spoken now. She put him back in his crib. She straightened his blanket. She didn't need to, but she did, because she wanted one more moment with the weight of that decision not yet fully made. One more moment of pretending she was still a woman who could go back to sleep and wake up in the morning and be the wife and mother everyone expected her to be. She went to the master bedroom. Robert was asleep. She looked at him, this man she had never fully loved, this man who represented everything she was supposed to want, who had given her a home and a child and a position in the world and a name that meant something in the circles where names meant things. And she felt something that was not hatred and was not love, but was something rarer and more terrible. She felt complete clarity. The kind of clarity that is its own kind of madness. The clarity that tells you that all the paths in front of you are real and that you can only walk one and that whichever one you choose you will lose everything else. She wrote the letter. She sat at the writing desk in their bedroom, the mahogany desk Robert had bought as a wedding gift, that she had never used because she had never needed to write anything that wasn't a thank you note or a party invitation, and she wrote him a 6-page letter and she did not cross out a single word. She put the pen down when she was done and she read it once and she folded it and she put it on his nightstand and she weighted it down with a crystal paperweight in the shape of a horse that had been a wedding gift from his mother, because she wanted him to know, even in his sleep, even in the morning when he woke up and reached for her and found an empty space, that she had not left carelessly, that she had thought about him, that she had considered the cost. She walked out to the garage. She got in the red Mustang. She did not look at the nursery. She did not go back inside the house. She drove away. She told me that halfway to New York, on the Merritt Parkway at 2 a.m., with the windows down and the warm June air flooding the car and the road shining silver under the highway lights, she pulled over onto the shoulder and she put her head on the steering wheel and she sobbed so violently that the car shook. She sobbed for Connor. She sobbed for the life she was abandoning and the person she was becoming and the person she was leaving behind. She sobbed for the woman she would have been if she had stayed, the good wife, the present mother, the society hostess, the heiress who did her duty, who reproduced the dynasty, who smiled in photographs and remembered names and gave to charity and was, by every external measure, a success. She sobbed for that woman because she was about to kill her and she wanted to mourn her properly. And then she sobbed because she did not actually believe the old Margaret was dead. She believed she was just sleeping, and she was terrified that one day she would wake up and she would be that woman again, standing in a doorway, looking at a life she had not chosen and did not know how to leave. She sobbed with grief and with terror and with something else, something that felt, even now, even from 25 years away, like relief. Like the first breath after being underwater. Like the moment you admit to yourself that you have been lying, really lying, for years, and the admission of the lie is worse than all the lies combined, and then it passes, and after it passes there is a space where the lying used to be, and the space is terrifying and exhilarating and empty and open, and it is the most honest place you have ever stood. And then she drove. And she didn't stop driving for a very long time. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance? Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. On the 9th day of her stay, Tom came home early from work. He had been worried, he said, about me, about Margaret, about the weight of whatever she was carrying that had landed in our living room like a suitcase full of someone else's grief. And the four of us sat in the living room. Tom and me and Margaret and the bottle of Blanton's single-barrel bourbon Tom had been saving for something he called an occasion and that I had never seen him open, not for birthdays or promotions or the day our daughter graduated from college. And Margaret told her story again, and Tom listened with the quiet, steady attention of a man who had been married to me long enough to know that my stories were always worth hearing twice, and that the women I loved were always worth the time it took to sit still and receive them. Tom asked her a question I hadn't thought to ask. He said, if you could go back, if you could stand in that nursery again, with Connor in your arms, and you knew everything you knew now, would you stay? Margaret considered this with the seriousness it deserved. She swirling the bourbon in her glass. She held it up to the light from the fireplace, our first of the season, the smell of oak and ash filling the house, the warmth of it pushing back against the October cold outside, and she looked at the color of it, the amber, the way the light moved through it and fractured. No, she said. I would not stay. Because the woman who stayed would not have been me. She would have been a version of me that looked like me and sounded like me and went through the motions of my life, but she would have been dead inside. A ghost. A very well-dressed, very well-behaved ghost wearing someone else's skin. And Connor would have known. Children know. They know when their mother is a ghost. They grow up thinking that ghostliness is normal because that's the only model they have. And he would have married someone he didn't love because he watched his mother do exactly that. And he would have spent his life being reasonable and responsible and empty. And he would have blamed her for it without ever having the words to say why. And I would have watched it happen, and I would not have been able to stop it because the ghost would have been too tired to fight. Too tired of pretending. Too tired of being something she wasn't. She paused, took a sip of bourbon, set the glass down on the side table with a small, precise sound. But I would have left differently, she said. I would have fought for custody. I would have said goodbye to my son, not in a letter, not in a voicemail, but to his face, when he was old enough to understand, maybe 5 or 6, maybe not even then, maybe it would have been impossible, but I would have tried. I would have promised him, Carolyn, that I would come back, that I would always be his mother, that the leaving was not the same as the abandoning. That there was a difference between leaving a life and leaving a child, and I had conflated the two because I was young and scared and I didn't know how to them. I would have kept that promise. I would have called him on his birthday every single year. I would have shown up, not as the mother who was supposed to be there every day, but as the mother who chose to leave and chose to love him from a distance and chose to let him know that even women who run, even women who burn their lives down, still love their children. I would have done that differently. I would have been braver about the leaving and more consistent about the loving. And I think if I had done that, he might have understood. He might not have forgiven me, and I wouldn't have asked for that, but he might have understood. And understanding might have been enough. She looked at the fire. The logs had settled and there were sparks rising and falling, small brief lives of light. I failed him by leaving, she said. I know that. I failed him in the moment I chose myself over him, and I am not going to pretend it was a noble choice or a heroic one or a sacrifice for my own self-actualization. It was selfish. It was profoundly, irredeemably selfish. And I have lived with that knowledge for 25 years, and I will live with it until I die. But I also failed him by disappearing, by not calling, by letting the silence between us calcify into something that could not be broken without effort, without pain, without risk. Those are two different failures, Carolyn. And they both belong to me. And I have to own both of them. And I have to live with both of them. And I have to try, even now, even at 55, even with $11 and a garbage bag in a room in someone else's house, I have to try to be something my son can eventually understand, if not forgive. Tom reached over and took my hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He had heard enough. He had heard a woman tell the truth about the worst thing she had ever done, and he had understood, as Tom always did, with his quiet carpenter's logic, his builder's sense of structural integrity, that the truth was the only thing that could hold. On the 11th day, I drove her to Bridgeport. She wanted to see the old house, the Ashford house on Prospect Street, the one her father had willed to her brother Richard, the one where she had grown up behind tall hedges and leaded windows and a circular driveway that had been paved with money and maintained with the same meticulous care Howard Ashford brought to everything, including his children, who were assets to be managed and legacies to be perpetuated and were never, not once, to be understood as people with wants and needs that diverged from the company plan. The house was still there, of course. It was always going to be there. White Georgian, for columns, the flagpole in the front yard that her grandfather had installed in 1952 and that had flown the American flag every day of Margaret's childhood, in sun and rain and snow and the particular gray of Connecticut Novembers. The flag replaced every year on Memorial Day with a fresh one bought at the hardware store like everyone else's, except the Ashford's flagpole was 30 feet tall and the flag was regulation size and it was flown with a precision that bordered on the devotional. Richard and his wife had painted it a shade of gray that was supposed to be fashionable. The garden had been redesigned by a landscape architect from Boston, a man who had studied in Vermont and who believed in native plantings and rain garden and the kind of ecological landscaping that Howard would have found preposterous, aesthetically interesting but practically useless, like art that had no function. The property looked immaculate and cold and like it had never once contained a single methy, shouting, joyful family dinner where someone spilled wine and someone else told an inappropriate joke and someone's mother told them to stop talking with their mouths full. We sat in the car across the street. Margaret didn't get out. She didn't take a photo. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just looked at it, at the house that had raised her, and the flagpole that had watched her leave, and the hedges that had kept the world out and kept her in, and the circular driveway where she had learned to ride a bicycle and where her father had once, just once, thrown her a football and caught it badly and laughed, actually laughed, Howard Ashford, a laugh she had replayed in her memory 1,000 times because it was so rare and therefore so precious. My mother died in that house, she said, quietly. In the room at the top of the stairs, the one with the bad draft. She was 68. The doctor said her heart just stopped. No warning, no final illness, just a heart that had been pumping faithfully for 68 years and had simply decided it was done. But I think her heart stopped years before that. I think it stopped the morning she realized that no one in that house saw her. Not my father, who was at the office from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and brought work home on weekends. Not me, who was at college and then traveling and then married and then gone. Not Richard, who was at boarding school and then at Yale and then at the company and then married to Caroline in a ceremony that my father said was the happiest day of his life since the day the company went public. My mother was the most beautiful woman in every room she ever walked into, and she was completely, devastatingly alone. And she died alone. And I was in California when it happened, chasing something I couldn't name, and I got on a plane and I flew home for the funeral and I stood at the graveside and I cried. And I think the tears were for her and for me and for all the conversations we never had because we were both too polite, too well brought up, too afraid of saying something real to ever say it. She turned to me. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. I'm not going to pay Robert $42,000, she said. I don't have it, and I won't borrow it, and I won't beg for it. And I won't pretend that his offer is reasonable or that his conditions are fair, because they're not. They're the conditions of a man who is wounded and who has spent 25 years building that wound into a fortress. And I understand a fortress. I built one of my own, but I will not pay to enter a family I was born into. That's not love. That's transaction. And I spent enough of my life in transactions. I married into one. I left one to escape it. And I will not go back to a version of it where my presence has a price tag. She put her hand on my arm. Her fingers were thin and strong, and there was a scar on her thumb from the pottery wheel in Santa Fe, from the life she had lived, from the woman she had become, which was someone who made things with her hands and left them behind. Drive me back to your house, she said. I need to borrow a shower and a clean shirt, and I need to call Robert one more time and tell him to go to hell. Politely. With love. But go to hell. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance? Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. She made the call from my kitchen. She stood at the counter with the phone pressed to her ear and the late October sun coming through the window above the sink, the same window I looked through every morning to check the weather, to see if the hydrangeas needed water, to watch the neighborhood come to life in its small, ordinary, precious way, and she said, Robert, it's Margaret. I want you to know that I love you. Not the way a wife loves a husband. Not the way I was supposed to love you on our wedding day when I stood at the altar and said words I meant but didn't understand. But the way one human being loves another human being who shaped them, who was part of their story, who gave them something even when it wasn't the right thing. I love you. And I love Connor. And I will love you both from wherever I am for the rest of my life. And I will not pay you $42,000 to do it. Not because I don't value what you've built. I do value it. I value it more than I can tell you, because you built something real while I was busy chasing something I couldn't define. But I won't pay. Because paying would mean that the love is conditional on the money, and it's not. It's not conditional. It's just, it's there. It's been there for 30 years. It's been a terrible, imperfect, insufficient love, but it has never stopped. And I won't let a number in a bank account make it look like something it isn't. She paused. Listened. I could see Robert's voice on the other end, not what he was saying but what it was doing to Margaret's faith, the way her expression shifted through registers of emotion so fast I could barely track them. Like watching someone read a book and react to every plot turn in real time. No. I will not pay you $42,000. I don't have $42,000. And I won't pay to be loved, Robert. That's not love. That's transaction. And I spent enough of my life in transactions. And you know that. You know that more than anyone. We were a transaction from the beginning, your money and my family's connections, your stability and my family's legacy, your good name and my good face. We were a merger, Robert. We were a merger that should never have been structured, because the due diligence was never done. The people doing the deal didn't understand what they were acquiring. And I didn't understand what I was agreeing to. And we both paid for it. And we're both still paying. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for the part of it that was my fault. And I know the part that was yours, and I know you're sorry too, even if you can't say it, because you built a life after me that was better than the life you had with me, and that tells me you learned something. And I hope the learning wasn't too expensive. Another pause. Longer. Margaret's eyes closed. Tell Diana I said hello. Tell Connor I said, tell Connor his mother is okay. Tell him that. Tell him she is okay. Tell him she's still figuring it out, but she's okay. And tell yourself whatever you need to tell yourself to be able to sleep at night, Robert. You were a good man in a bad marriage and you did the best you could, and so did I. And sometimes best aren't good enough, and that's just the way it is. That's just the way life is. She hung up. She stood there for a moment, holding the phone, looking at the wall. Then she put it down on the counter, carefully, like it was something fragile and important, something she would need again, but not right now. She turned to me. She was crying. Not the performative tears of someone who wanted to be seen crying, not the dramatic tears of a woman in a film processing a life-changing moment, but the real tears of someone who had finally let something out that had been stored too long in a place too deep, like a cellar that had flooded and the water had been sitting there for 25 years, and finally someone opened the door and the water came out and it was dark and it smelled like mineral and rust and things that had been dissolved. In it, all the things she had never said, all the words she had swallowed, all the grief she had carried in silence because carrying it silently was easier than letting it be heard. He's not a bad man, she said, through the tear, and she was laughing too, that Margaret laugh, that unhinged, beautiful sound, like a bird that had been caged so long it forgot the shape of flying but remembered the feeling of it. He really isn't. He built walls. He built walls around his life and his money and his family because that's what his father taught him to do, and the walls kept everyone safe, including him, including me, even when I didn't want to be kept safe. He did what he thought was right. He loved the way he knew how to love, carefully, conditionally, with prenuptial agreements and retirement accounts and a will that accounted for every possible contingency except the one where his wife woke up one morning and decided she could not do it anymore. He did what he thought was right. And I did what I thought was right. And we're both paying for it. And that's just the way it is. That's just the way life is. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She laughed again, that wild Margaret laugh, the one that contained equal parts joy and grief and defiance, the laugh I had fallen in love with 28 years ago in a dorm room at NYU when she had walked in on her first day of college with a suitcase that cost more than my parents' car and a smile that said she was going to be the most interesting person I ever met. And she knew it, and she was excited about it and slightly terrified by it and completely determined to be it anyway. Okay, she said. Okay. What now? I wish I could tell you that Margaret found redemption in the way the stories promise, clean, complete, earned. That Connor called her the next week and they reconciled over coffee in Boston, and he wept and she wept, and a family that had been broken for 25 years was quietly, imperfectly, lovingly mended. That Robert sent her a check for $42,000 with a note that said he was wrong, that he was sorry, that he had misunderstood what she was asking, that she was always welcome. That Diana had told him he was being a fool and Diana was usually right about these things, and he had finally listened to her the way he should have listened to all the women in his life who were trying to tell him something real. Some of that happened. Not all of it. Connor called her 3 weeks later. I know because she called me immediately, breathless, laughing, crying, and said, "Carolyn." He called. He called me. He said he Googled me. Can you imagine? He Googled his own mother, and he found the non-profit in Deborah and the work I was doing there, and Deborah told him I was someone worth knowing. And he said he doesn't forgive me. He said forgiveness isn't his to give. I asked him what it was then, if it wasn't forgiveness, and he said he didn't know yet. He said he wants to meet me. He wants to have coffee. He wants to look me in the face and see who his mother is. They met. It was not a movie scene. It was two people in a coffee shop in Boston. Connor in a suit because he'd come straight from the office, a navy suit, a white shirt, a red tie that Margaret later told me she recognized because she had bought it for Robert for their 5th anniversary, and Robert had apparently kept it and given it to his son, which she said it was the most complicated gift anyone had ever unknowingly received. And they talked for 2 hours, and they did not hug and they did not weep. But they talked. They talked honestly and painfully and with a kind of raw, ferocious respect that I think was more honest than forgiveness, more real than reconciliation, more useful than closure. Connor asked her why she left. Not why she left Robert, that part he understood, or thought he did, or had made peace with, but why she left him. His specific question was, "Why didn't you take me with you?" And Margaret told him. She told him the truth, not the philosophy, not the soul-searching jazz improvisation, not the 15 years of therapy she had never actually done because she had always believed she could think her way through anything and had only recently begun to understand that some things had to be felt before they could be thought. She told him the simple, brutal, insufficient truth, because I didn't know how to be your mother and be myself at the same time. And I chose wrong. I chose myself instead of you. And I have regretted that every single day since. And I want you to know that it was a choice, not a failure. I didn't fail at loving you, Connor. I failed at staying. Those are different things. And I need you to know the difference, because the difference is the only thing I have left to offer you as an explanation. Connor said he needed time. He said he didn't know what to do with a mother who had left and come back and left again and come back again. He said he would call her. He said he might not call her. He said he wanted her to know that he was not saying goodbye. That there was a difference between goodbye and needing space, and he wasn't sure yet which one he needed, but he was sure he hadn't decided yet. And as long as he hadn't decided, she could call him on his birthday, if she wanted, and he would answer, or at least he would listen to the voicemail. That was enough. Margaret told me that night on the phone, her voice quiet, stripped of every piece of performance she had ever constructed. Just a woman talking to her oldest friend about the hardest, most important, most alive she had felt in decades, that it was enough. That being told the truth by the son she had abandoned was the most she could ask for. That she would take his uncertainty over his silence, his questions over his acceptance, his confusion over his closure. Because his confusion means he's still thinking about it, she said. And thinking means there's a door. Even if it's barely open. There's a door. And I can put my hand on it and I can feel that it's there, and I know that at some point, maybe not today, maybe not this year, maybe not for 10 more years, but at some point, that door might open. And I will be on the other side of it, waiting. Not pushing. Just waiting. Because that's what mothers do, Carolyn. That's what I should have been doing all along. And it's not too late. It's not too late. I'm 55 and I have $11 and I live in a room in Bridgeport, and my son doesn't forgive me, and I am still, somehow, impossibly, on the side of the door where hope lives. And I'm not giving that up. I refuse. Robert did not send the $42,000. He also did not say go to hell. He said through a lawyer, because Robert had always processed big emotions through lawyers, because lawyers were to Robert what poetry was to Margaret, a language that made chaos manageable, that the offer was under review, which meant he was struggling with it, which meant Margaret's refusal had landed somewhere inside him and was doing the slow, painful work of reconsideration, the same way water does to rock, not dramatic, not fast, but persistent, inevitable, and eventually something gives.